The Journey of Square Peg, Chapter 22, Precipice. 4 hours later, a heavy meal in my body and the cat fed too, I left my family to enjoy the wonders of a normal toilet, my toilet. Having placed a bucket of rainwater ready by the sink, I settled on that glorious cold throne. Of course, I soon heard my children coming up the stairs beyond the door, talking and laughing until they reached the bedroom opposite the door. This golden moment had been longed for like a steak dinner and a pint of beer. 1 out of 3 was not to be sniffed at. Determined to savour the moment, I leafed through an old magazine, revelling in the luxury of not having to squat. It was as domestic a moment as I could remember, appreciated hugely. It was real and wonderfully civilised. And then the unreal sound of our front door shattering snapped me back to reality. Now, as any family man will know, it isn't unusual to be disturbed in the toilet, but in this moment I sat there in shock, caught short and stunned. Swearing and the sound of boots in the kitchen below filtered through the stripped floor to where I sat. There were shouts, rough voices, a scuffle on the stairs, a cry from my son. Silence from my wife and the little ones. Then the shocking sound of my children whimpering as the intruder reached the top of the stairs. Just feet from me met my ears. My heart began to pound, senses on high alert, rage rising in me as I sat listening incredulously. Helen's voice was clear as she began to implore the unseen stranger beyond the door. I could picture her shielding my girls from him, desperate and unarmed. Adrenaline coursed instantly through me. Apoplexy began to take over from the shock of this intrusion on our domestic bliss. Quick and silent, I stood and pulled up my trousers, slipping my arms into my ghillie suit, but not daring to spend time securing it. In that moment of utter focus, with my family threatened by someone beyond my sight and in our home, my mind processed almost subconsciously the voice downstairs too. Despite the psychotic rage welling in me, it dawned on me that my pistol would be too loud and most likely invite a return volley of fire up through the floorboards. I needed to take the first one quietly and surprise the second. Decision made, I slipped my folding knife from my pocket, pushing the blade open with my thumb until its surgically sharp 3-inch blade locked into place. As my wife snarled and my children whimpered beyond the door, my hand went to its handle. Beginning to sweat, I paused, trying to judge when he might be engaging them, for he would have his back to me then. Suddenly, I heard the telltale bump of the water pipe under the bathroom floor as he stepped on a loose board on the landing. Now I knew exactly where he was. He spoke with a local accent, the almost imperceptible echo telling me he was facing the bedroom rather than my door. Waiting no longer, and with a sharp intake of air, I twisted the oval handle, yanked open the door, and threw myself out there. Even before I reached him across the 2-foot space between the bathroom door and where he stood, he had flinched and begun to turn at the sound of the door latch retracting. He made no sound as he gulped in surprise. Processing on a different level to him, I struck my foot down onto the lowered barrel of his gun before he could raise it. Simultaneously, my hand blasted out towards his exposed throat, slipping inside the flinching arm that came up to protect him. The knife blade disappeared inside his throat as I rammed it home with my full body weight, continuing my charge until we tumbled to the floor together and I was pinned. The blade was so sharp that only a small trickle of blood escaped the wound and ran between my knuckles. As he tried to roll away from me, clutching my wrist with the knife still embedded, the flow increased exponentially. Determined, charged with primal anger, I let him go, using his movement to pull me up and on top. A second later, we were lodged against the bedroom door, my legs locked around his arms to pin him hard to his torso. A split second later, and having now noticed the still form of my son slumped on the stairs, I twisted and jolted the knife, soaring forward to complete the fatal cut. I don't remember breathing, only snarling through gritted teeth, exerting an animal strength as I played my role. I wondered why my family stood so still and so long. I didn't hear my children's frightened cries, only lazy echoes and his gurgling demise, the soundtrack to an ejaculation of blood that spurted forth to hit the banister spindles and the wall above the stairwell. As the blood belched from my victim, it pooled rapidly around us, making the landing sticky with steaming crimson pools. The stench of hemoglobin hit my nostrils. Alerted as he was by the sounds of the scuffle, the grunting of the two of us locked as we were in that momentary mortal combat, the second intruder's boots stamped up the stairs, a slow pounding that seemed to me, in my heightened state, like a distant giant's footsteps. As he climbed the stairs, stepping over my son as he came, his blurred head rose like the body of a kraken above the floor level beyond the splattered spindles. My feet jammed under the dead weight of his dead friend. I turned my head to follow his rise to my level beyond me. Seeing that I was holding only the knife, the pistol being tangled beyond retraction in the loose folds of my ghillie suit, he slowed his pace and swept the doorways around him with the barrel of his assault rifle before training it on me. His black clothing and green webbing made this apparition swim in my blood-stained vision. Soon I was looking down the barrel of the gun, my mind weirdly full of lucid thoughts, regrets and sorrow. All was experienced in slow motion. I did not feel the shot that followed the muzzle flash until an eruption of searing heat smashed into my consciousness. The scream in Russian above my head was lost in an unbelievable wave of pain, its extent beyond any I had ever experienced in my life. Blood, my own this time, hit my face as the round struck my twisted shoulder, and I arched involuntarily, unable even to exhale or scream, such was the shock. Belching blood spurted into my gaping mouth. Cold-eyed, without a hint of mercy on his face, my assailant now levelled the rifle at my awestruck, immobile family. Blue eyes shot a look over his shoulder to the staircase below, and returned to the children as they were pulled around behind Helen by her determined hand. And then, I wondered, had something moved below? The boy on the stairs began to moan and clutch his temple. This I observed with both relief and curiosity, for the noise seemed not to coincide with his movement. The killer did not react. He was just a semi-conscious boy. Doubtless my attacker planned to get this done first, and then deal with him. The woman would be useful, the children a liability. "It's okay," he said in a northeastern accent as my girls cried. "Send the kids over to me. You're safe now." His hand reached out, palm up above me, as my vision swam, the apparition's arms swirling out to beckon them over. Hate was tattooed on his knuckles. His voice above the din was as familiar as the evil intent that oozed around his words. He smiled like a dog. With the children in this play, I froze as surely as you might freeze to see a lion enter your back garden when your children are playing there. But as my mind caught up with the situation, it was quickly evident that he could shoot me again before I could have drawn my gun and turned to use it. The children clung to Helen, buried their faces, tiny arms exerting a superhuman grasp, as I and she began to beg, desperation rocketing up in our voices, desperation that extended also the hand of my uninjured arm, as if hoping to stop the bullet as a goalie might stop a ball. His hand was away from the trigger as part of this ruse. His boot planted in the blood by my foot. The knife lay on the floor where my smashed arm had released it. Nobody seemed to breathe. He raised the weapon again at my pleading form, his finger moving towards the trigger as his eyes narrowed. On impulse now, I launched myself to the side, freeing a leg to aim a glancing kick to his knee. Swearing in anger, he twisted, caught himself on the handrail, and swung the barrel of his weapon back towards my head. A shot rang out. Wood splintered from the banister rails, some piercing my skin. A cacophony of screams and shouts filled the air. As I lost consciousness in a sea of pain, I heard people speaking Russian, my children sobbing, and Helen calling to me. Other voices floated up from the hall below, voices that organised, voices that followed orders and passed them down an unseen line. It's okay, I knew that voice. It's going to be okay.